So we were targeted intentionally by the government of Syria and their affiliated armies and militias, because we are humanitarian workers. We are supporting those people in the non-government controlled areas. So we were considered as enemies.
This is Phoenix Stories, where we look at sustainable development in post-conflict zones. I'm Professor Martin Spinelli at the University of Sussex, and on this episode of Phoenix Stories, I'm speaking with Yousef Rakkad, who is Cash and Voucher Assistance and Market Coordinator at GOAL. Hello, Yusef. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Professor Martin.
Yusef, in a few words or a few sentences, can you please just tell me what the main mission of GOAL is?
Since it was founded, GOAL set a clear goal for themselves and a clear message that they're gonna try to change the entire situation of the vulnerable communities affected by the crisis globally. So that means they wanted to change that from crisis to resilience. With doing so, they were referring that the key cornerstone in this humanitarian affairs work is that they need to strengthen the local capacity of the affected people. So they wanted to make that as a stabilizing situation with supporting the local systems, rather than making those people would stay in the same context for a longer period, relying on the humanitarian aid. So what GOAL tried to do is that they wanted to invest more in the economic well-being, and for the sake of the self-reliance objective. They were trying with working on maintaining the basic needs and services, but gradually reaching at a point that those people are no longer in a need for an assistance, with them being empowered and being self-reliant, so that they are no longer, like consumers, rather than they are producers.
Great. So what are some of the main obstacles to you in achieving that goal of self-sufficiency?
There are so many. One of the key barriers, while looking at the Syrian crisis specifically, one key thing is that we have a high level of vulnerabilities against unmet needs and cut in terms of the funds. We have witnessed that the number of vulnerable communities and the number of people in need, they are getting higher and higher because it's a prolonged crisis. And while when it comes to the humanitarian summit, when it comes to the humanitarian response plan and the donors, so we used to get setbacks in terms of reducing the commitments year by year. And this is one of the reasons that you feel yourself that you have to do a compromise by making your targeting strict by strict over years and minimizing, or at least, trying to deliver the job regardless of the quality.
Can you give us an example of what some of those specific vulnerabilities are and what that minimum standard is? So for those who are perhaps new to thinking about this activity in this space, what are those vulnerabilities and what is that minimum standard?
While referring to the water services, for instance, so for every single person daily, so there is a minimum requirement of drinking water by liters and for non-drinking water by liters. The daily kilocalories intake for an adult person is 2,100 kilocalorie. The minimum that you should provide would be 1,550. Other than that, you are letting people behind and you are continue working in the food insecurity rather than changing the situation to a food security.
So 1,550 calories, what does that look like? Is that a sandwich? Is that a plate of cheese and olives? What is 1,550 calories?
While referring to the dietary diversity score, that there should be on Part of it by the protein, part of it would be the fat, and the other would be by the carbohydrates. Regardless of what type of diet would be like within your daily foods, then this should be maintained that you have 60%, 70% of proteins, 20% of the fats, and the rest would be for the carbohydrates. So this would be achieved with 2 loaves of bread, for instance, plus olive and butter, and some of the beverage daily. At some level, you need to think about the other dimensions and other elements of the food security, which refers to the stability of the delivery and the availability of these deliveries over time, plus to what extent that the food you are going to providing is being utilized by the beneficiaries themselves.
So what are some of the other key obstacles that you are facing in Syria at the moment?
We have a kind of change in terms of the whole of Syria map since the 8th of December. So we hope that would be the key, like for solving this crisis. The issue with the inability to reach the communities within Syria. So we had to respond through the hubs by the cross-border. That thing affected the type of coordination mechanism across whole of Syria response.
Is that because there are so many different would-be governments at play? I imagine famine in another country with a stable government, humanitarian agencies, aid agencies, NGOs can deal with a government, whereas on the ground in Syria, at least up until relatively recently, there were a bunch of disparate authorities, if you will, that had to be negotiated with to deliver aid and relief.
In the non-government controlled areas, so we had to deal with the de facto authorities, while you have so-called governments, whether in northeast Syria or in northwest Syria. That situation, was received and was non-acceptable by the government of Syria at that time. And we as the humanitarian actors, so we were targeted intentionally by the government of Syria and their affiliated armies and militias, because we are humanitarian workers. We are supporting those people in the non-government controlled areas. So we were considered as enemies. So imagine what would be the situation there as you are trying to respond to a dire crisis there, a high level of vulnerabilities there, very deep gap in terms of the response versus the needs, while at the same time your safety and security is one of the key issues because you are getting targeted daily. We have lost so many of our staff by the shelling and the bombardment of the government of Syria. That is one of the key barriers for you to deliver more and more while you feel yourself that you are added to the number of casualties at some point.
Yusef, when you were on the ground, I'm assuming you were on the ground making field visits to deliver these relief packages. Did you yourself ever feel in danger? Did you ever feel your own personal security was at risk?
Many cases where we were under direct targeting by snipers because we were trying to support front lines and those vulnerable communities in the front lines that they cannot get an assistance because of fears from the humanitarian workers not to be targeted within those front lines. So we were trying to get that initiative and trying to support them to relieve their pain and trying just to reach them so that this is no longer a kind of hard to reach area. I could witness so many intentional targeting for us as the humanitarian workers, rather than the random shelling, whether the artillery shelling or the airstrikes that went into our supported bakeries, water station, and our markets where we support our programs for cash and vouchers.
That's the next thing I wanted to ask you about, your work in providing cash and vouchers in camps. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you have done and are doing in camps and how that makes a difference in people's lives?
Our response was limited to the response in communities, inside communities. However, I can recall, the time in late 2019 with a massive influx of displaced people, internally displaced people within northwest Syria to other safer locations in the north of northwest Syria. So we witnessed a massive influx of more than 1 million people
Wow.
Within 2 months, they are out of their homes. They are seeking any destination, regardless of what would be the cost. They were a makeshift camps, improvised efforts by those communities themselves. We had our strategic meeting that time within GOAL, and we have said literally that those should be our target. Because other than that, we are adding more pressure to the communities where we are serving the assistance. So because in most of the situations that people would know GOAL or X agency is delivering assistance there in that community, so that is considered a pulling factor for those IDPs in order to seek for a humanitarian aid. So rather than getting more pressure to the already congested infrastructure, so we're gonna support them within these informal camps. I can recall that we started with the multi-purpose cash assistance for one-off distribution. Then we continued working with 3 rounds of multi-purpose cash assistance. Then we have witnessed that some of those IDPs, they have started establishing their own business with very tiny budget, with a very tiny seed funding.
So tell me how much are we talking about? What is the seed funding that you would give to someone who was going to start a small business in one of these settlements or camps?
We did our market observation. We did our rapid market assessment just to capture the current capacity in the market. Although these camps was informal, we get that idea that those within this market, the makeshift market, let's call it, so there's kind of cash flow is moving from the consumers to the producers to the retailers inside these camps. Okay, that would deserve our attention. How we gonna work on the main mission of GOAL? How we gonna change the situation of those people from crisis to resilience? How we gonna work on the self-reliance objective? And we have received through our community engagement many requests from them, the small vendors, let's call them. They were asking us that we need your support in order to establish or expand, either start up a new business or restore our businesses that was destroyed.
So typically, how much would they ask you for? What dollar amount would you get asked for?
We could serve those with businesses up to 500 USD.
So tell me specifically, so what can I do with 500 US dollars in a settlement, in an environment like this?
One of the vendors, he was serving chicken and meat. I can recall that the kind of assets, so kind of refrigerator, some of the basic tools and instruments needed for the establishment of that businesses was up to $800, $1,000 within the camp. However, we were working on the trying just to make them to get their attraction, and in order to get them fully engaged with the program, so we set a condition of the contribution that time. So you may contribute with the total capital, with the whole capital, by 200 USD, for instance. We're gonna contribute with a 500.
I'd like you to tell me about a particular person who you saw benefit from GOAL's involvement in one of these places.
I do remember one of our beneficiaries. She was Saida. She was an IDP with her family from Aleppo to one of the camps in western Aleppo countryside in the non-government controlled areas. She was living with her children in a makeshift shelter inside one of the informal camps. This lady was a widow. She was, just trying to get an income for her children. Our team interviewed her, and she was highly, ambitious. She was feeling that she is responsible for the cost of living of her kids. She is responsible for changing the life of her children. She was trying just to deliver the message that I was a producer one day. So I am not in favor of getting every day on the beneficiary list. I need your support. I do have the intention, I do have the willing, and I do have the capacity to run my own business. So we granted her with 500 USD to establish her business, which was about food processing. So she used to get some of the foods from the market. She was working on marketing that in the market again. We did few observation visits to this family, and after a while they were not in need for the humanitarian assistance. She became a breadwinner at the end of the day.
What does sustainability mean for GOAL, and what does sustainability mean for your beneficiaries?
Sustainability means sustainable access for those beneficiaries so that they don't face or witness any interruptions in accessing their basic services. The access to the assets that they lost for a while or for a decade or even longer than a decade. Sustainability means sustainable community by, having a cohesive community in reshaping or reintegrating the communities themselves between those hubs across the whole of Syria map. So I can recall that for a decade. Me, for an example, so I could not see my extended family for more than 12 to 13 years. Others who are living in Northeast or in the government-controlled area or in Northwest, so they did not see either their children, their fathers and sisters, mothers and sisters and brothers. They did not get back to their origins for more than a decade. So sustainable meaning in the humanitarian workers' mentality that, okay, they do have a sustainable access to their communities, to their origin communities. I have met with so many expats from different parts of the globe. Many, if not all, told me that the Syrian people are resilient. I pit the willingness and the capacity of the Syrian people.
Yusef, we're at a historic and transitional moment in Syria, as you know. What do you think NGOs should be doing at this particular moment to get the best outcome for Syrians right now?
Coordination is on top of their efforts. I would think that nowadays coordination is definitely saving lives. So this is on top of the issues that they need to focus on and try to maximize the level of coordination among the agencies. Second is that they should be the voice of those affected communities. Nowadays, everyone can get the assessment that they need in a very short time. So they can get a very deep understanding of the current barriers, obstacles, vulnerabilities in order to shape their projects, proposals, and advocate to the donors for the supporting the affected communities. We need to provide more sustainable solutions. So back to the sustainability, we need to provide an alternative solution that would fit for purpose. We are now in a new era. We are now, trying just to respond to those beneficiaries within a new instruments, within a new innovative solutions. And we do have the solutions, and we have the solution providers, and we can provide these solutions. But what we need is that better coordination, listening to the people, advocating to them, getting the funding, and let's make that happen.
That's a brilliant way to end it. Yusef, is there any final brief thought that you would like to leave us with?
After 13 years from the crisis, the Syrians now, they are playing a core role in the ownership of this response. They are now playing an important role in the humanitarian architecture. I would say maybe one day they would be, if not the decision makers over, the humanitarian assistance in different missions, they would be influencing these decisions.
This is Phoenix Stories. On this episode, I've been speaking with Yousef Rakkad, Cash and Voucher Assistance and Market Coordinator at GOAL. We had financial support from the Business School at the University of Sussex and technical support from the School of Media, Arts and Humanities. Our podcasting consultants were Resilience Limited. The producer is Ruth Holroyd, and the executive producer is Morella Barbu. I'm Martin Spinelli. Thanks very much for listening, and if you work in the humanitarian or aid sectors, please know that your work is appreciated.